Hello, I thank you for coming to see this video. It's a talk that I gave about a week ago here at the Museum of Old Newbury, Moon, in Newburyport, Mass, about Bartlet Mall. We had some technical difficulties with a light bulb that wouldn't work, so we're doing it again in a virtual way. 3 years ago, I gave a presentation to Moon on the museum at their annual meeting. And at that time, this was the agenda. There were 4 items. Thankfully, tonight, it'll just be 3. And starting with what our forefathers here at this site created. And this is a landing place in Newbury. They came up from Ipswich in May of 1635 and settled along the shore that's shown here. The location is known, and there's a boulder at that location, settled on the Parker River. Coffin, one of our wonderful historians, showed this map of where they went from the landing site, which I guess I can't point out with this technology, but it's about the center of the picture. And there's a road that goes vertically up. And the only things that are shown on that map as being important is the Spencer Grant, which is a rectangle just south of the bay, and Watts Cellar, location unknown, but near the firehouse, Frog Pond, which is the subject of tonight's talk, and the ferry landing, which was to get you across Merrimack River. I think this is a particularly important place in that it is one of only a very few places in this area where an Indian or the first European settlers that came would recognize. It's on the National Register along with the courthouse. When the settlers came here, 1635, they stayed there for 19 years, and there was a movement to have them move up to the Merrimack and get off the Parker River. And I think the reason it's intriguing to me that the location of that, you can see Frog Pond on this map with an X on it. And then the waterfront at the bottom of this barbell image in light blue. But they could have settled any place along this shore and the distance would have been the same. Why did they settle here? I think it's because there was Frog Pond and Watts Cellar were opposite each other, and that became the center access of Newburyport. The first drawing we have of the area is 1766 by Mr. Vinyl, and it's the whole area that today we call Bartlet Mall plus the graveyard. I won't go through this, it's tedious to do so, but Frog Pond is shown. In addition to that, you have some of the industrial part of Newburyport. The rope walk is at the top to the right. In that industrial commons, which would take to be a subject in and of itself, you have these items occurring in that first industrial part of Newburyport. I am not going to bother to read these these slides with words, because I think it'd be tedious for both of us. But since you can just hit pause and read and then let it continue, that would be more efficient for both of us. The first image of Newburyport was drawn from the hill that still exists, and it shows Frog Pond in the foreground with ducks and cows. And it was a watering place for the settlers when they came. There was a part of the reason they came here, they were sent by people who had an interest in raising cattle in the Americas. And then for the first effort to beautify what we call Bartlett Mall was done by Nathaniel Tracy. And he said he planted some trees, got permission to plant trees where the rope walk once stood. So that's 1779, almost a quarter of a millennium ago. Nathaniel Tracy did that work. This is the man painted by Trumbull when he was in London. He was very wealthy. His father was particularly wealthy, and he planted the trees when he was 28 years old, and he died when he was 45. I'm sure unhappy event, as he had everything going for him. The house still exists. It's our public library, and that, along with its addition, are shown on the lower right in this image. At the same time, the wealthiest man in Newburyport was William Bartlett, and his home still exists at 19 Federal Street. His son was Edwin Bartlett, and he gave, as a young man, he gave $1,400 to fill an unsightly gully on High Street, which was really at the head of what today is Green Street. $1,400 at that time would represent $250,000 today, assuming 8-hour days and an average wage of $30 an hour for labor. He asked the City Council of Newburyport to be reimbursed, and he was refused. Can you imagine why? And then at the same time, this is just the first day of 1801, the local courier quotes the Herald, a newspaper that said this, as you can read. But it says, an area so long neglected, when completed, will be not only useful to the people individually, but when the trees shall be grown, it will be greatly conducive to health and highly ornamental to the town. 2 years later, you had the city wanted to have a building to conduct business in, and the traveling court of sessions wanted to be able to have a place for themselves here, a courthouse. So those needing a location, they picked the head of Green Street because Bartlett had made it beautiful, and Tracy. And needing an architect, they selected the head selectman of Boston, Charles Bulfinch. Mrs. Bulfinch is a young man. He married his second cousin, Hannah Apthorpe, who was the daughter of the richest man in Boston. And Charles Bulfinch had built at age 25 the State House in 1789, and he had taken the grand tour of Europe before that, and he'd actually designed this building when he was 23. At the year that he came to Newburyport and did our courthouse, he was at the same time doing Faneuil Hall in Boston. There was a Faneuil Hall, and it was about 10% the size of this building. So what you see there today is Bulfinch's product. This is my idea, using the original Bulfinch drawings, which amazingly have come down to us, of what the courthouse looked like at the time. The next thing that was to occur 20 years later, 21, is that Stuart Park, architect, and had done a great many stone buildings and had worked with Bulfinch in Boston. He was hired and did the Essex County Jail, which lies adjacent to the courthouse property, to the Mall. And it was to hold the people that hadn't been found of crimes yet, and then actually to hold them after they had been, if they determined they had committed a crime. Amazingly, we have this drawing of the building done by Mr. Park, and this is an image of him as an older man. And then the next event for us is in 1839, again, another almost fantastic event. Henry Coit Perkins of Newburyport came up and took a picture out of the school building that you'll see later that he had attended school in. He set up a camera of his own making and shot in 1839, took this picture across Frog Pond to the jail. This is one of 6 images the Moon has here that this museum kept in a lockbox in downtown Newburyport. And it's thought to be the oldest picture taken in the Americas outdoors, the oldest landscape photo that exists. This is Perkins. He was not only the photographer, but he was a scientist. He invented the stop bath, the fixer and stop bath that held the images that had been discovered earlier in France, how to do solar paintings by Daguerre. Later, he was a physician and head of the Massachusetts and Mass Medical. Another image by Perkins. They're copper plates with silver put on them, and he has put a paper frame around them and put dates. This is October 30th, 1839. So, and we know this exists because there's reference to it in the local newspaper that these images are available for viewing. I encourage you to see Susan Edwards of Museum of Old Newbury did a program on Perkins. I encourage you to look for that, and also her one on Bartlett Mall. A drawing that I'm guessing at 1860 without knowing, but the school still exists, the West Grammar School in the upper left, which was torn down later. But this is and the courthouse is the orange rectangle in the upper center. This is an early engineer's drawing showing the perfection they wanted and got in the sloping surface shown in green and the staircases. And this curved surface on the left-hand side, you can even see that there's a black line. The curve itself is called, it's a French curve laid out. It's a mathematical curve. And then the black line is showing a surveyor who had checked its accuracy. So you can see at what level of care the people of Newburyport cared about this Bartlett Mall. On the right in rectangle is a private property that was set aside and was purchased later. I'll get to that. This is a very rare image in that it's dated. It's on the back of it. Mr. Mosley put 1867 in his, what appears to be his handwriting. It shows, of course, an ice skating scene, and the camera exposures would have been long, so you can see the women's dresses look like triangles. And you can have, this helps to be dated by the school that's in the distance on the right and the courthouse that's on the right. The jail is center left, both the keeper's house and the jail itself. Another image at about the same time shows the school at the south end, shows the courthouse with a coat of white plaster that helps date it. And then on the right center, above the water, is the area that was private property that contained barns and houses. Barns and houses are on the left, and this is the south schoolhouse. And importantly, it has the Washington statue, which is dedicated in February 1879. So we know that when this picture was taken within a 2-year span because of the buildings that exist. The sculpture was John Ward, who did 22 public sculptures, many of which you would know. The benefactor was Daniel Tenney, and he died 2 years after he gave the sculpture. It's a one-of-a-kind piece of work. It's remarkable for that. The same sculptor did this, the Washington that's in New York City in front of Federal Hall. And in New York, he also did the artwork that's in the pediment. The sculptures at the top of this in the New York Stock Exchange are by the same sculptor, as are many, many others that you would know. The Pond Street house and barn is in this picture, taken across the water. It shows that the slopes had been taken care of and evened out. And you can always know this by the board fence. It was purchased for park use in October 1881. That same year, the Herald newspaper came out and said that the mall, if it was improved at no great expense, would make one of the most beautiful ornaments which are enjoyed by any city in the country. I think they achieved that. Those of you that know landscape architecture know that Frederick Law Olmsted is the father of landscape architecture, so considered. He lived a long life, and he trained under him 2 men. The father of one of them is this Charles William Eliot, who was Harvard president for 40 years and is widely considered to be the most important president Harvard has had. He took it from its curriculum of being ancient languages and religion, and he brought science into the equation for Harvard. And that even ricocheted down into the school system of teaching mathematics when people were in grade school. And there you can see, he wrote this years after his son, who died of a premature early death. He wrote this in a 1,000-page book he wrote about his son. The reservation, or what we would call Bartlet Mall, was an eyesore and a nuisance, and it became a beautiful object and a healthful resort for the people of the city. That last line is what we used. Bethany found this, and it was used for today's talk. This is his son, Charles Eliot, one of the two premier students of Olmsted. And he attended Harvard 1878 to 82. He was on Olmsted's staff for 2 years. And then Olmsted said, take a tour. And he did that and went to Europe for 1.5 years, and then came back, and Olmsted wanted him as a partner. In between, when he returned and when he became a partner of Olmsted, he did 3 projects on his own, and one of them is Bartlet Mall. This is from the letter he wrote to us on the 30th of September, 1887. And he talks about it being the ancient common. At the same time, for the meeting, he brought this drawing. It's the first of 2 that he did, same date, 1887, September, of his plan for Bartlet Mall. Again, much of this was in place. The slopes at the bottom of your screen, that's along High Street, and the upper slopes, even with showing the tree locations, existed. What he did touched everything on this site, but mostly what he did was on the left side, which is the south side of Bartlet Mall. From his first letter, this is a fundraising letter, not his letter. I'm sorry. This is not Elliott. This is a newspaper article fundraising for what was the MIA, Mall Improvement Association, at the time, that did all the work, raised the money, did the work, and gave it as a gift to the city. It says, no son of Newburyport can look upon this area without a feeling of disappointment and mortification. Some of us feel that way, that know what Bartlet Mall was. We feel that way today. And this place has striking and natural advantages, high and central, without great expense, can be made exceedingly attractive and ornamental. When he came, the work was mostly done in 1889. This shows a plan of that he brought at the time, and where the green arrows show the 2 areas that he changed from one plan to the other. More on that later. Then a report was made and actually typed, done as an official document of about 12 pages that tell us what they did. This is the result of that effort. Again, surprisingly, we have the actual day this picture was taken, because the photographer scratched on the negative the date down in the lower left corner. But you can see here the great accuracy and care they took in the slopes, and how perfect the lawns and slopes and stairs and edging were all taken care of. They didn't have the capability to solve the pond that's in front of us now, or to provide an edge for the pond. Same time, I think the same day, possibly the same photographer, where you can see most of Frog Pond, which is about 2 acres in size. Another area of it here, you can see the trees, and obviously Elliott didn't put these in, but they were done before he got here to be this size. And very importantly, Edward Mosley, a wealthy, successful banker, and gave this fountain to the town a couple of years after the pond was in place. That's Mosley's fountain. There's reason to believe he also financed buying what's called the training field, that area in red I showed you earlier. And he gave money to the MIA, he gifted money to them, and he gave Newburyport the library. We're converting a house. This is a small portion of the drive off, of the drive is in the center, the Y-shaped piece, and you can see that Kelly School's in the distance. This is looking north and west, and the playground's on the upper right. And I've counted, there's 23 people in this image. More on this later. The promenade was repaired, and in this picture you can see there's been damage from ice storms. Elliott talks about that, but and in the distance you can see the front columns in the center of Kelly School. Used to go clear through, today it's held short. And the other major thing, there's a Taggart, a man named Taggart gave this fountain, sorry, that's out of focus. It's a postcard from 1910, and it was done at the same time. It contains 3 fountains, 2 for horses, and then one at the bottom. There's a small fountain at the bottom for cats or dogs, whatever, animals, dogs, I'm sure. And then the center fountain is for people. I don't know how they got rid of the water, but the whole is quite a construction, and it was damaged. A car hit it or truck hit it. So we're through, we're up to 1900. And then where did we go after that? So the trees that were there that were all pruned high, so you could see underneath them, they weren't pruned high anymore. There's, people were happy with what it was, did not care to spend time maintaining the concepts. I'm sure they didn't know the concepts. The next man that came along to help us was Arthur Sherpcliff, another world-class man of national stature, landscape architect. He was with Olmsted for 5 years, and he, in his life, did Colonial Williamsburg. You're probably familiar with that. He did Old Sturbridge Village, the Charles River Esplanade, where the bandshell is, the Crane Estate. He did the Back Bay, the Fens, and he did the layout of Route 128. And he was he was a founding member of Harvard School of Landscape Architecture, which was done by Elliott, father Elliott, and his son. The father knew about the need. This is what he looked like. It's interesting to me that in 1894, he sent a letter to Olmsted asking him, it'd be of kindness if you'd allow me to call upon you and you advise me in what courses to take to become in landscape gardening. Olmsted assisted by giving him Charles Eliot to guide him, and so the two knew each other while he was being trained. He wrote this piece about the value of the commons. It was part of his dealings with the city. I'll let you read it, but he points out that there is a dollar and cents value to parks and Frog Pond. It's a money bringer as it gives distinctive character to Newburyport, which assists in holding a valuable group of citizens and bringing in intelligent visitors. That should be all of us, right? If you're interested in this subject, I'd like to think that that's us. We should not think of the maintenance of the common as an extravagance, but rather as an economic asset. To keep this asset to the full, the common should be regarded as a colonial record and should be safeguarded against decoration and embellishment as modern parks are. A degree of plainness amounting to austerity is essential to this early character, but an appearance of dilapidation or neglect is of course a liability. He and Elliott talked about the fact that parks are expensive when you have flowers, edging for the flowers, all that fussy work. And we see that in Newburyport. The Victorian Park is a wonderful park in Newburyport, Atkinson Common, and it has those features. And it costs us much more to maintain that than it does Bartlett Mall, particularly if we're able to get the mall fixed. This is a drawing Sherpcliff did in 1914, hangs in the mayor's office in the ante room to the mayor's office, I should say. And you can see in the upper left, this plan is an interpretation of the plan made by the late Charles Eliot. And he showed the first references, Elliott's first drawing. Now, and the green line, I'll get into that later. You can see here's Elliott's plan. I put the green line and the green circle. And what he's talking about here, which we'll get into later, is a promenade on Pond Street, or Major Walk. Next group to be involved, this was taken in 1977. There was a City Improvement Society, and the Morals, man that's named for in the Moral Trust, was very much involved with it. And Frank Forrest Morrill was his son, and they lined up money that's still giving money to the parks every year, usually in excess of $100,000, which is extraordinary. And this is an article, more on this someday if I give a talk on the courthouse, but here the mayor at that time is talking about Byron Matthews is talking about restoring the courthouse on the right-hand side, but we don't have time for that. The next group was 1999. Walker Kunstling, landscape architects, did a scheme with the city, and their recommendations, the summary said, our goal is to recreate the image of the mall in accordance with the Charles Eliot's 1887 plan. So here again, on and on and on. Everybody that knows anything wants to take it back to what it once was, because it was so extraordinary. When you came to Newburyport, something everybody saw, and there are postcards galore on it. It was a gorgeous place. What we have today is just a shallow, more or less insignificant fragment of what that was. That project was too expensive, and another group took over because one of these, Kunstling, died, and they reduced the scope, and the Cecil Group, I believe in Boston, did it in 2005. They extended the promenade, did some other things, and obviously had no real knowledge or didn't care about the history of the mall. Then we have the Bartlett Mall Association, and that started someplace around 2005, and Geordie Vining, city planner, wanted to be sure that the work, that people did know what an important place it was and what the work should be done and taken care of. And that association continued to about 2019. These are people that were members of it at the last stage. Andrea Eigerman is on the left with her mother-in-law, and this in the background you see the sculpture that was borrowed from the Maritime Museum. And sometime through here, the corporate memory, the memory of Bartlett Mall was lost. And planning was done without any plan. Slopes weren't mown. The theory was an unmown slope would help the water, and that was proven later to not be true. Trees weren't pruned high. They hadn't been for a while. Walkways weren't adequate for the traffic, and the memorials were placed. And that originally, this was not a memorial garden. This shows wonderful volunteer efforts planting 5 cherry trees in July 8th of 2017. I felt this was misdirected in that there wasn't a plan. The ideas behind Bartlett Mall had been forgotten. shows the lot of vehicles. These vehicles were Parks Department essentially collecting the dog poo bags, and they would drive their trucks down and around and raise havoc with the walks that weren't designed for them. This has been stopped. This is at high water, how the truck tires would tear into the bottom of the slope, which you don't want. So an effort was made to educate. This Jeff Briggs sculptor is helping by putting up made the frames and put up the signage that I gave him, where he's a dear friend. And it's an example of one of the signs taking an old image and then announcing that there was going to be a Bartlet Mall Day that was put on by the ladies then in power, Bartlet Mall Association that I discussed earlier. Fortunately, this is just a sounding here at Moon, the Museum of Old Newbury. Sharon Spieldinner worked here along with Susan Edwards, ran the place, and Sharon worked at the library and here, and she found all the records of the Mall Improvement Association, which were voluminous. And here Susan has found a colored, an image that had been hand colored. So in 2017, all this work was investigated and presentations were made, and thankfully the agreement of the Bartlett Mall Association and Parks Commission both agreed to restore what was in 1900 and preserve the valuable parts of that, and to adapt if we needed to, where it was appropriate to do so. That was a turning of the mindset about Bartlett Mall. We now had a direction. These are the goals. I'm not going to bother to read those. You can hit pause if you choose to do that. This is first Bartlett Mall Day, 2017. And of course, this is pre-COVID, but very highly attended, very, very successful party. And the next thing that also happened, we started to repair slopes that had been damaged by the planting of some bulbs. And so we got work on the slopes. And that winter, that happened in this location. And the slopes were then mown twice in 2018. They hadn't been mown for years, 7 years. And finally, they start healing. The slopes needed to be mown, and also to hold down noxious weeds. And then the same year, we pruned the trees. The new MIA was founded, and they raised the money to prune these trees that hadn't been pruned in 13 years. And trees are supposed to be pruned the year after they're planted or 2 years after they're planted. It wasn't done. There's no follow through on no maintenance essentially at Bartlett Mall. The budget was $500 a year. So a new ordinance came along about 3 years ago, covering all 26 parks, and Bartlett Mall had its own person run to be a member of it. MIA was established, a new MIA, call it MIA 2.0 maybe, and you can see the goals, same goals. So now we're down to what should be done, the last part of this. And the Essex County Courthouse comes first because it's the oldest. I'm doing these by the date. This is a rendering that I had done showing what I think the Essex County Courthouse looked like when it was original, when it was Bullfinch. You can see here it had an arcade in front. It had some marble pilasters that were flat on the building. It had a pediment on the front and on the back, and that's Justice standing up on top with her scales. That's the way it looked to do this building. I'm sorry, it wasn't the way it looked. This building was built because in 1834, the city wanted some more money to enlarge what they called the market building. and to put a second floor on it. And this is that project. So Newburyport sold its interest in the courthouse, where they had a 50% stake, and built this building, which is in many ways so close to the size, shape, materials to the courthouse. It's remarkable. That's for another talk. We happen to have, amazingly, the statue, the original statue of Justice from the courthouse. And so she stood there from 1804 to 1858 in theory. She would have been in tough shape being wood, but in any case, she's been restored and is at the Maritime Museum. That's my wife, and we went to Pem, and here again another break of the original drawings of Charles Bulfinch, which are not found, to my knowledge, in any building except maybe the U.S. Capitol. His entire set of drawings, including the front and back cover in color, the drawings that were used to build the building, exist and are kept in a vault in Rowley at Pem's archives. One of those drawings is a cross section, and you can see it here, and I've put white people here, just giving you an indication, because it's a section, of course. It's a vertical. Take a knife, cut it through, and look at what it looks like in cross section. The area in green on the left is the arcade that's missing, but is now inside the building. It could be restored, and there's work here. Again, it's a whole nother story. But and if you look at the back of the building, the part facing the pond, you can see marble. We call them string courses. They abruptly end at the corners, and then you can see where the brick was filled in, getting rid of the marble. It would be a very simple matter to remove some bricks and put in the marble and get Bulfinch back into the building. To give you an idea what that is, oh, this won't spin. I guess with this technique, I can't turn that, but this is the building, and this is a image that spins and shows you what is and what could be. I don't have it for you by this using this technology. Oh, I do. Okay. There's the old building. There's the Bulfinch building. What we have today, Bulfinch, what we have today. So you can see if you'd have to put a new roof on it, the brick is the same. The amazing thing here is the brick is the same brick. So by removing material, we could get Bulfinch back. It's an amazing possibility, and I think would be funded by the federal government in its grants program. Frog Pond is a major issue now, and of course this shows Frog Pond in 1891. You have gravel walks in this location, cobblestones to slow the runoff. You see the trees are planted, but they're trimmed high. A major part of Charles Eliot's goals was to be able to see distance through a park, not have limiting of the trees in the way, not have really hedges to speak of or shrubbery, and no flowers. My drawing of the my work, at least, to Rob Leanna's artwork, showing the courthouse as it was. I've taken the liberty of showing it that way. And what we proposed if Frog Pond is fixed, which is in front of the city council this month. And this is the idea of putting a granite edge around it, and upon that granite edge, having some of the blocks etched on the top surface, telling the story of Frog Pond and Bartlet Mall. And it could tell the story of Newburyport, because there's 200 such blocks needed. And then the water would be cleaned, the pollution gotten rid of permanently. This is what we have at high water. It's taken in 2017. Seen that, that's the erosion that can occur, high water, look in the opposite direction. I did get rid of the waste baskets at that location. There's more needed at other locations. So we're trying to improve the water level and restore the Mosley fountain. This money has been granted by the CPC. It's in hand, $126,000, and work will be done in Rowley at the Cassidy Brothers Forge that does amazing restoration work and is known nationwide, and a special finish put on it to have it last a lot longer time, and brazing work done. This shows a plan of the pond. If you see it in light blue, that's the shape we would have, and the dark blue indicates the walk and the granite edging shape it could be. Upper left is the new accessible playground, its location, and and restoring the drive that came into it. The Y-shaped drive is in brown. On the right, you see the Pond Street Promenade or Broad Walk, and the work on that has started both in trees and in paving. More work needs to be done. So Elliott told us in his first letter that ponds are curbed in public gardens. He'd been all for a year and a half as far as Russia, England, Italy, France, and knew how things were to be done. And he said that the water supply is supplied by the city and maintained at one level by an overflow gate. Obviously, we haven't done any of those things. We're in line to do so. A picture taken of two children that were in up to their chest, and I took this from the old jail where I live with an iPhone, so it's very faint, but children still play in frog ponds, polluted water. It's a very real hazard. That's what they had. You can see what's been given up. More from Elliott. So, no quote, but it's stagnant water. The only water that comes into it's rainwater. And so the height varies, more and more polluted. The plan is to drain the pond into the Merrimack, which we can do, and have the mud and some of it removed, the top 6 inches, dig a well beside it that will fill it up to a constant height, have an overflow on it, which exists, and an edging placed so that an overflow can connect to a sewer system, which amazingly, and it's hard to read here, but the courthouse is up above. There is an intake that was put in and water to a water system that was put in place between 1840 and 1908. And that water system has been checked by the city engineer. It goes under High Street. We have it coming out on Water Street, and then it goes down through Prospect Street and others, and to cisterns about every 3 blocks, and drops down to where the factories were along the Merrimack River. We think a lot of that's in position. We don't need it all. The part we need the most, we already know exists. It's a good situation. The playground here, getting to that, playground's on the right. I've shown you this slide before. And so if you take that view and look at what we have today, that's the same view, what they have and what we have. And we can get what they had, with the exception of the trees, of course, won't grow that tall in my lifetime, but we can get the landforms right, we get lighting in, we can give this whole texture and be very delighted with it, wide enough to take machinery that needs to come down. So all that can be done in that period of time. So we can get rid of this. And this is my sketch again of the park, the plant, the basketball court's not accurate, and the playground equipment is not accurate here, but the rest of it is. And you can see that the promenade continues to Kelly School. We were able to get rid of this asphalt and We have a half-court basketball court here now. So the accessible playground would be in this location. And this is taken at the end of the promenade. It needs to be extended to what used to be Kelly's School, it's today condominium. We need to continue to prune trees. It's been done once. This is Elm Park in Groveland. It's so much better than what we have. It's higher, trimmed high. And I would hope that we can match Groveland in their energies. We have one American elm left that's on the right. The rest are the hybrid or Chinese elms in this case, which will never grow tall, unfortunately, but they can grow taller and be more open. There you can see the drive on the right in this early 1839 photo. We know it was there even at that time. And the Taggart fountain can be restored. There's ways to do it by using sheet steel and bronze castings, but it needs to be out of the middle of the street and be on the promenade itself. We have $600,000 for this effort. CPC is a major part of that. The Moral Foundation's a major part of it. It needs to happen, but the trouble is we can't really start that work without fixing the pond bottom, because it'll all get torn up when the machines come in. So if we go back to these two landscape architects, and this is the third one along Pond Street. I showed you these this is Elliott's plan. And then this is Sherpcliff complaining about it. I've tried faithfully to follow his plans, departed from it. Seems to require. His plan has not been carried out, notably at the Broad Walk. This pathway has not been constructed and is greatly needed. I showed in full lines as I indicate in dotted lines the position of the present walks, which seem to me inconvenient and not pleasing to design. We're working on this. We have the major walk-in. We need to complete the project and then be sure it works, because of course sidewalks are tough to change and people are used to the pattern that's there. And some of that may need to be put back. This shows what we had when we started. And at this point, you can see the memorials, the cannon from World War I, the German howitzer, and the stone on the left. And in the distance, you can see the walk. So people coming from the south had to walk 21 paces to get up to where they could turn left to go west. Now it's like this. My sketch again, you don't need to, they can step directly on it and go west and go to the right and go along the high street. So the idea is there's a surrounding walkway all around the pond because you don't know where people are going to enter it. They can enter it from any location now and go wherever they choose. This is what we put up during the Art in the Park, and showing the areas that were done and not done. Some of these trees need to be planted, etc. So the remaining steps, we've got the City Council needs to approve, if they will, the CPC decision to give the bond issue to fund the cleanup of the pond. We have the money for the engineering documents. It's been funded by CPC and the city's approved that much. Manage construction, we have that money. And we need to maintain it. Well, if we get it done, it'd be a low yearly expense is our goal. And the playground and engineering is funded. So we have a lot. We're down to one decision really. And this is the planting plan. You can see we're planning adding 74 new trees. Not all that's funded, but we can get that money, I think, quite easily. And so that's the end of my agenda. But Bethany, in her wisdom, said, what if we miss this opportunity? So I guess I'm obliged to what I see as the problems. Periodically we forget the importance of the mall and what it was and why it was like that. And then it gets brought back into focus. So if you look at the years where it got into focus, 1887, the MIA and hired Elliott, did that work. That should be 1914 and 1935. Sherpcliff was involved and helped us. Then 1999, Kuzling, Walker Kuzling, landscape architects. She was a teacher at Harvard, pointed out what it should be. And then Vining created the Bartlett Mall Commission around 2005. So the issue, I think, is can we trust our sick pond to remain docile? Can we really trust that it's going to stay and not hurt anyone? I'm hopeful that our generation can solve Frog Pond and perfect the common through history. So the goal is long term, we could have the gem of a Bullfinch Courthouse and Bartlett Mall restored. It'd be a remarkable asset for Newburyport. There's a film here taken in 1976, but just this much, since I can't play it, just this much tells you how popular a place this was. And it does show people boating on the water, which we can't dare do anymore because of its pollution. And
was how to say
oh,
okay.
another piece from the same gentleman that made the film. So thank you very much for attending. I hope it was beneficial for you. If you have any questions, you can reach me either through Moon or I'm at EGA Architects in Newburyport. They can get in touch with me. Thank you very much.